Hey guys, Cody here. I thought this would be a pretty interesting video to do. So essentially, I've been thinking about turning my long-term rental into a short-term rental. And I know for a lot of you, you're probably thinking, oh, well, I've heard a lot about Airbnb, but I'm not really sure. I don't know if I would do that. And so essentially, I wanted to start to document me kind of building this business, and just give you some insight into, kind of my thought process, why I'm doing it, why I think it's a good idea. So yeah, so first I wanted to start, you can ignore what's on the screen, but first I wanted to start with kind of what are some pros and cons to both. So for those of you that don't know, STR, short-term rental, essentially, or vacation rental, essentially what that is your Airbnb, your VRBO, HomeAway, Booking.com, and it's really where you're renting your space short term. So that means, maybe a 2 or 3 night stay, maybe a week, 2 weeks, maybe your property's in a more desirable area or a high traffic area, maybe some seasonality. And so typically short term rentals are generally do better in those markets than long term rentals. Some pros to short term rentals, you're maximizing your revenue. So because you're booking on a nightly or weekly basis, you're going to get more money than if you were to have somebody who's long term. If you're super into real estate investing like I am, it may turn a non-cash flowing asset or home into a cash flowing asset because now you're making more money, you're making more than your expenses. Whereas if you had maybe getting $1,200 a month, that wouldn't cover your mortgage, interest, principal, tax, all that stuff. Some people use short-term rentals. It provides freedom. So if you have enough of these guys, you are making quite a bit of cash flow that might provide you freedom from your job if that's what you're into. And another, sorry. And so then if we look at some of the some of the cons for short-term rentals. There it requires more time. So whereas a long-term rental, you're gonna kind of just take it. You'll sign a lease for a year, maybe 2 years. With the short-term rental, obviously you have to manage that asset on a daily or weekly or monthly basis. They're a little bit more risky. So if your short-term rental is not doing well, if nobody's in it, if it's vacant, you're not making rent. That means your expenses are obviously still due. So that might not be appealing for some people. You're also open to complaints, so you're obviously going to be having strangers in your home more frequently. Whereas with a long-term tenant, obviously you can do a bit of research, do your background checks, your normal quality tenant screening, and then you're also just going to have a lot more traffic at the property. So I know for recently in the news, Airbnb had issues with kind of like a party scene, and there were some unsavory people that were at the house, and unfortunately it turned pretty nasty. But yeah, so that's some of the pros and cons of short-term rentals. Now, if we look at long-term rentals, some of the pros there are obviously we talked about they're a little bit more stable. So you're going to sign a 12 or 24-month lease with an agreed upon rent. So you definitely know what your revenue is on an annual basis. They're less time to manage. Obviously, you're still you might get the occasional phone call. Hey, the toilet broke or the sink's not running or whatever, but in comparison to short-term rentals, they're definitely less time intensive, and there's also less money out of pocket. So with the short-term rentals, you're going to have to furnish them, and so that's providing a level of amenities, furniture, and some other goodies. So with the long-term rental, most people will not provide a furnished unit. Obviously, your market may be slightly different than mine, but essentially those are yeah. And then cons with the long-term rental, quite frankly, you're leaving money on the table, right? So we have our agreed upon annual revenue, with our rent, but with the short term, or excuse me, with the long term rentals, you could be just getting more. Another thing that people don't realize is there could potentially be higher amounts of damage. So if somebody's in your property for a few years, you might not have complete insight into how the tenant is handling, is managing your property and handling it and treating it. So yeah, so that might be an issue. They might be there for 5 years, but then, when you go to turn over the unit, you notice there's holes in the walls, the place is disgusting. Yeah, so, and then another thing is eviction. And so this is a really nasty term that a lot of landlords fear. But I mean, it is true. If you sign a lease with somebody, you rent your home to them, they can just stop paying. And depending on your state, some states are super landlord friendly. My state, New Jersey, is not. They are a very tenant friendly state, and so because of that, the eviction process can be very expensive. It can be very long, and can really just leave the homeowner hanging. So now, say that you're for short-term rentals or long-term rentals, or maybe you just don't know. The reason why and just to tell you, I'm a little biased, I'm choosing short-term rentals. But the way that I got there is I did some research. So obviously I did this before I bought the property, but I've done a lot more research in hindsight after purchasing. We have a big rehab going on. So while I patiently wait for my contractors to do what they need to do, I've decided to really go in depth and decide what's better for the property. So this is Rentometer.com, or Rentometer, depending how you want to say it. I'll have a link to this below. And essentially what you can do is you can throw in so my property's on 15th Avenue in Belmar, New Jersey. You can put in an address, and then you can kind of put in your desired rent and the number of beds, and then you can just ask it to analyze. It is free up to a number of uses, but after that you do have to pay for it. But yeah, so once you do that, it'll then provide you with the average rent. It'll kind of show you the area, median price, the upper, and then the lower. I'm sorry, excuse me, the upper and then the lower. So this will give you a pretty good idea of where your rent, what you need to charge, kind of stands within the marketplace. So we're going to use this number. I actually went a little bit lower. I know my market. I know about 1,800, or hold on. We went with 2,000, so that's a lie. So I actually went with a little bit higher because I know I actually am in a high demand area. So okay, so using that, the next thing you can do is, and I use AirDNA.com. I used this. This is totally free. You don't have to pay for it. You sign up, and you can at least get some general insight into the product and kind of what's going on in your market. It'll give you things like the average daily rate. So my property is in a shore town, so obviously there's a ton of seasonality there, but the average daily rate here is 300. Occupancy, because of that seasonality, January and February are obviously terrible by the ocean, but in August, as an example, I mean you're almost 100% booked essentially in that month, and it gives me some estimated monthly revenue, blah blah blah. It'll also show you kind of where people are booking. And so when you sign up for this, I think you get one or two, I'm not 100% sure, but you at least get one report that's definitely free. And with that, yeah, and so you'll get a PDF document. It'll show you that's actually what the property looks like, and it'll give you an estimate of the annual revenue, your daily rate, which is we already talked about, and then your occupancy rate. It'll also show you your competitors, which is pretty cool, and it'll give you an estimate of kind of what they're making, so you can kind of have, if you're looking at a property and you're saying, okay, well, I kind of want mine to look like this one. It can give you an idea, as long as the bones are the same, that, you can get a pretty good idea of what you're kind of looking at. Some other items it has here is just showing the average daily rate, how it changes over time, the occupancy forecast. So as you can see, like I said, Jan, Feb, March are pretty terrible, but then as we start to get warmer, it starts to spike up here in July and August, and you have some pretty good occupancy. So I'm going to take a breath here. So again, we're looking at our long-term rent, and then our short term, using our tools here, and then I'll actually show you. So I actually made this little nifty Excel to do a full comparison. And so what I did is I took my $2,000 a month in rent for my long-term rental, and then I took the annual amount. So typically you should be putting away at least 10% for vacancy in your market. So I took my monthly rent times 12, and then taking 10% of that number, and then I'm just backing into my monthly just so we can see. So theoretically, if you had somebody in your property, you'd want to be putting at least $200 a month, just in case for when if somebody was to be in for 12 months and then it was going to turn over. You want to be able to repaint, clean, maybe fresh carpet or flooring, depending on what you do. But so the income and expenses here are pretty easy. Now for the short-term rental, I took the revenue estimate of $53,000 and I divided that by 12 to start with my top line revenue. And then I also took cleaning. So, say if I hire somebody for $15 an hour, let's say it takes them 3 hours to clean the unit after somebody stays, and then I just did an average of 20 days per month occupancy. Obviously, some months it's less, some it's more, but I think that's pretty fair. Furniture. So obviously with the short-term rental, you do have to furnish it. So this is a year one expense. I'm just using, $6,500 in my market. That seems reasonable with how I'm going to be furnishing. Divided it by 12. So, if say you had a long-term rental that you currently have and you wanted to switch, you can start to put this money aside to buy the furniture when it turns over. Utilities is the same thing. So I took my water, and then I'm taking my estimated electric plus, Wi-Fi cable, getting a monthly rate there. And then I have this just upgrades and extras. So this is essentially just like, say, if I want to add some cool things as we go, there's, maybe a couple extra expenses I didn't plan for. Again, I'm just giving myself a monthly rate there. What's super interesting here is you can see the monthly difference. So this is just comparing the short-term rental minus the long-term rental. So with the short-term rental, on average, we should be making $2,400 more a month. Again, on average. Annually, that works out to 29. The same thing here. We have no cleaning here, so we're actually spending an extra 900. We're spending an extra 542, etc., etc. So when we break it all down, we're taking our increased revenue, and then we're minusing out all these increased expenses. And this guy's a credit here because we don't have traditional turnover. And what that shows is that we're actually going to be making $13,000 more annually on this property. Now, obviously, you might not agree with all these numbers, but everybody's market is different. For some of you in the, I guess, Midwest or the South, you might be looking at this and being like, "Wow, that's really expensive." And in New Jersey, it is. But I'm pretty comfortable looking at these numbers and deciding that this is better than the long-term play. I know that there's a ton of automation tools out there and some other things that I'm definitely going to be leveraging to reduce my time expense on this property. But I'm pretty comfortable that this should be a good investment. And like I said, I will be kind of taking you guys along on this journey so you can see how I build it from start to finish. But it makes sense that this is the first part. So this is kind of the rationale I used. And so I just wanted to share that with you guys. So, if you found this video helpful, give it a like. Obviously, you can also, I'd appreciate it if you could subscribe. And I'm looking forward to, being able to do more videos like this. So thanks for your time, guys. I appreciate you watching.